Hello dear viewers, this is the Ruslan Belov channel, and in today's episode we will analyze the situation on the territory of Ukraine as of December 7th, 2025. A multitude of significant events have been recorded throughout this day, so without delay, let's proceed to the analysis. As of today, a significant number of changes to the front line are being recorded. We begin our analysis with the Zaporizhzhia sector. Russian military formations are conducting active offensive operations on Kupiansk. According to various sources, the city is being attacked from two directions, eastern and northern. The 35th and 5th Armies of Russian forces are involved in the operation. Furthermore, according to information from some pro-Russian analysts, by the morning of December 7th, Russian troops managed to completely take control of Dakhnaya Street and Zaporizhzhia Street up to the point where it intersects with Donetsk Street. Consequently, there is a probability that this part of Kupiansk is already under the control of the Russian army. In the eastern sector of the city, offensive operations are also continuing. Today, the Ukrainian side posted a video recording filmed in the area of Zaporizhzhia Street. We will refrain from viewing these frames, however, they show the actions of Ukrainian FPV drone pilots attacking Russian positions. Based on this material, we made minor corrections to the display of the eastern section of Kupiansk, as well as in the territory to the north and northeast of this area. The next point of our analysis is the settlement of Dobropilya, where combat clashes between Ukrainian and Russian military units are ongoing. Let us recall that several days ago, Ukrainian forces published video material showing how their servicemen are installing flags in different areas of Dobropilya. Here are these frames showing Ukrainian fighters raising national flags. Based on this video recording, we made changes to the map several days ago. However, today another video recording appeared, again from the farm area, from the region of these structures. These frames already show Russian servicemen who are erecting some kind of construction on the road near this building. The wind prevents a clear view of what exactly was written on these constructions. But these very frames testify to attempts by the Russian army to conduct a counterattack. Nevertheless, Russian forces are not advancing deeper into Dobropilya, not moving toward the Haicha River. In other words, they are trying to maintain a certain distance. Apparently, the entire territory along the P85 highway and along the Haicha River presents a danger for presence. That is, most likely, the entire P85 road is now a grey zone, where Ukrainian fighters can periodically penetrate to create another video material, after which they immediately withdraw. A similar situation has developed over the past 2 to 3 days on the territory of the village of Tiki. This is how the map looked just yesterday, December 6, 2025. Today, most cartographers are making changes based on another video distributed by the Ukrainian side. On these frames, we can see how Ukrainian servicemen are installing flags on the territory of this village. One flag installed in the western part, another in the eastern. Relying on these frames, we made corrections. That is, here a situation is developing similar to the one that occurred in the Dobropilya area. Ukrainian units forded the river, in this case the Vovcha River, conducted a cleanup, consolidated in the settlement, raised flags, and what happened to them next is unclear. Perhaps they retreated, perhaps they are trying to hold positions. But most likely, they left this section, so in the foreseeable future, Russian units will probably publish a new video refuting Ukrainian control over these territories. Next, we move to the Pokrovsk agglomeration. From this section today comes a multitude of important data and again, many significant video materials. Let's start with the fact that more and more often, video recordings demonstrating the losses and costs incurred by Ukrainian authorities, Ukrainian military command in their effort to hold Myrnograd and Pokrovsk are appearing on the internet. In these frames, we observe all supply routes that were used by the Ukrainian side to support garrisons in Pokrovsk and Myrnograd. And in these frames, we see tens and possibly hundreds of units of military equipment of Ukrainian armed forces that were destroyed by FPV drone operators of Russian forces. A bit further, to the northwest, another video recording from the area of the village of Shevchenko. A similar picture. Here we observe another graveyard of Western equipment, a huge quantity of various vehicles, armored personnel carriers, destroyed during, presumably, attempts to deliver reinforcements in the direction of Pokrovsk or Myrnograd. That is, overall, if we analyze this entire territory between Hryshyn, Shevchenko, Rodinsky and Pokrovsk represents one huge graveyard of destroyed equipment. Now we move directly to Pokrovsk and Mirnograd. We begin with the Mirnograd agglomeration. Today, the Russian Ministry of Defense announces that the center group of forces has completely cleared the settlement of Rovna. This is how the map looked yesterday, December 6th. Today, based on the Ministry of Defense report, we completely color Rovna in favor of Russian armed forces. That is, we observe that the Russian army is gradually advancing towards Svetle and Mirnograd from the western direction, forcing Ukrainian formations to increasingly concentrate in the central part. In all probability, in the near future, as we previously discussed, the entire Mirnograd agglomeration will be cleared. On the other hand, Ukrainian sources are distributing this video from the northern part of the city of Pokrovsk. It is reported that this video was specially prepared for the celebration of Armed Forces Day of Ukraine, and in these frames we can see 3 Ukrainian soldiers raising the Ukrainian flag in the northern part, along Ivan Bohun Street. That is, it was precisely in the area of this building that flags were raised. This is the northern section. It is still difficult to determine by what means Ukrainian servicemen penetrated this part of Pokrovsk. Perhaps some pockets of resistance still remain. Perhaps indeed the entire northern part of Pokrovsk represents a large grey zone where Ukrainian fighters can freely penetrate beyond the city line of Pokrovsk. Therefore, for now we are not rushing to make changes, but perhaps in the near future we will receive additional data, and when it becomes clear how Ukrainian soldiers are penetrating here, then we will make the corresponding coloring on the map. Next, we move to the city of Kostyantynivka, where the Russian army continues assault operations in the direction of the settlements of Kostyantynivka and Verolyubivka. Today, several changes were published on maps by various pro-Russian analysts. Individual pro-Russian cartographers marked a significant part of the eastern and southeastern part of the city of Kostyantynivka. This is how the map looked on December 6th. Today, the map in this section already looks like this, so far without any confirmations in the form of video materials. Also today, information is coming in about the almost complete clearing of the settlement of Verolyubivka. This information is also provided by various pro-Russian analysts. Already proceeding from all this, in the near future the settlement of Verolyubivka will pass under full control of the Russian army, and then only the settlement of Popasna will remain, located on the Russian side of the railway line that connects Chasiv Yar and Kramatorsk. This is the most important and very powerful bridgehead that the Russian army will be able to use for further advancement in the direction of the settlements of Oleksiivka, Druzhkivka, but even from this bridgehead, the Russian army will be able to develop an offensive in the direction of Kramatorsk. Next, we move to the Siversk-Lyman direction, from where a large quantity of important news is also coming. Let's begin with the city of Siversk. Today, video materials are coming from this section that confirm the presence of Russian units and confident control over the eastern part. This is how the map looked on December 6th. Today, the map already looks like this. This correction was made based on video material published by the 54th Brigade of Ukrainian Armed Forces. In these frames, we see Russian soldiers moving in the eastern part of Siversk. And also in another episode, we can see how strikes are being delivered on Russian army positions in the northeastern part. Based on these frames, we are making corrections. Another very important video comes today from the area of School Number 1, which is already located along the Bakhmutka River. Here are these frames published by Ukrainian sources, and in these frames we see how Ukrainians are trying to shoot down a Russian flag over the territory of School Number 1. This episode and this flag were geolocated. Precisely at this point, these events are occurring, and this is a very important video that either tells us about several things or creates several additional questions. Either Russian units have already reached School Number 1, that is, practically the entire eastern and central Siversk is under the control of the Russian army, and, as in the case of Vovchansk, Russian units are already installing flags in various parts of Siversk in order to prepare video material and publish it, and receive confirmation from the Ministry of Defense, or the flag was actually installed by a Russian drone. There are no answers to these questions yet, but overall the situation is very interesting. So there is already a high probability that in the next few days the Russian Ministry of Defense will fully confirm the clearing of Siversk or that part of it that is located on the eastern bank of the Bakhmutka River. Most important news, we are following the development of this situation. Also today, information is coming in about the beginning of combat operations for the settlement of Zakhitne. Today, a number of Russian analysts are reporting this, as well as people who have connections with units on the ground. Today, the settlement of Zakhitne has already been caught in pincers by the Russian army from the western and eastern directions. The T-0513 highway has been physically cut in several places. In the near future, the garrison of Ukrainian armed forces from this section will be forced to retreat. Analysts report that precisely this section, approximately this territory, is the most powerful fortified area on the entire Sloviansk-Siversk direction. And in case the Ukrainian side loses control over the line Zakhitne, Kryva Luka, Kaliniki and Reznikivka, then overall one can begin the countdown to the city of Sloviansk as well. Next, we move to the Kupiansk section. Important news is also coming from here today. Today, as you can see, there are changes both in favor of Ukraine and in favor of Russian armed forces. Today, Russian sources are publishing this video from the central part of Kupiansk, from the area of the Zaporizhzhia micro-district. Here we see an FPV drone strike on positions of Ukrainian armed forces in this section. Based on these frames, we made the coloring, a correction of the central part of Kupiansk, since strikes were delivered not just on some positions, but on positions of FPV drone operators of Ukrainian armed forces. And on the other hand, today the Russian Ministry of Defense reports that the settlement of Kucherivka was completely cleared by the West group of forces. That is, we see that the map here continues to change. Fierce battles continue here. The Ukrainian army is trying to unblock 15 battalions that are stuck on the Russian bank of the Oskil River. The Russian army is gradually clearing settlements, squeezing Ukrainian formations from this territory to the western bank. The European Commission has imposed a fine on the social network X in the amount of 120 million euros. This event has provoked a storm of criticism from American authorities. According to experts, what happened exposes a deep ideological split between the USA and the EU. What will the digital confrontation in the West lead to, and why are the European Greens desperately striving to become the face of this conflict? The European Commission must strictly ensure compliance with its digital rules. Such an appeal was made by Bas Eickhout, co-chairman of the Green Party in the European Parliament, reports Politico. According to him, Brussels needs to make it clear to the whole world that it is the only one fighting against large American technology companies, despite their attempts to kill freedom of speech in the EU. Earlier, the EC imposed a fine of 120 million euros on X under the Digital Services Act. Brussels' main complaint is the blue checkmark verification, which misleads the social network's audience, since absolutely anyone can receive it for just €7 per month. Also, Brussels is not satisfied with the lack of full access to public data on the platform. What happened caused significant indignation among American leadership. Thus, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio stated that the fine from the EC is not just an attack on X, but an attack by foreign governments on all American technology platforms and the people of the states. Meanwhile, Deputy Secretary of State Christopher Landau emphasized that the EU's implementation of its own technological rules undermines transatlantic unity, writes Politico. European countries cannot rely on the United States in matters of their own security, and at the same time decisively undermine the security of the United States itself through the unelected, undemocratic and unrepresentative EU, he said. As for Elon Musk's own reaction to what happened, it turned out to be no less stormy. Thus, the entrepreneur called on social network X to abolish the European Union and return full sovereignty to its member countries. In his assessment, this will help national governments better represent the interests of their own peoples. Later, Musk also called the EU the Fourth Reich. In parallel with this, as reported by X's head of product Nikita Beer, the European Commission's advertising account was deleted from the social network. Such statements and actions by the businessman forced Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski to give a harsh response. Go to Mars. There is no censorship for Nazi salutes there. Interestingly, the conflict over X is developing against the background of an unprecedented drop in the level of relations between the USA and the EU. Thus, Bloomberg writes that the recently published U.S. national security strategy contains a signal for Europe. The old world risks being destroyed if it does not change its culture and established policy. The conflict around the social network X initially bore the characteristics of a directly technical issue to a greater extent. The EU has been rethinking its own digital legislation for several years now. This process has already met with rejection from some American giants, for example, from Bill Gates, the founder of Microsoft, said Stanislav Tkachenko, professor of the Department of European Studies at the Faculty of International Relations of St. Petersburg State University, expert at the Valdai Club. In particular, many representatives of the IT business called the EU's legislative initiatives attempts to fence itself off from the influence of the states in the digital environment. Until recently, these disputes did not have an ideological character, and corresponding discussions of the problem took place in a fairly constructive manner, he explains. But at the present time, this situation has acquired a qualitatively new dimension. The fines against X coincided with a whole series of disagreements between Washington and Brussels in other areas. In this regard, participants in the conflict from both sides wanted to bring what happened into the stream of ideological clashes, the interlocutor emphasizes. Thus, the situation with X once again demonstrated the split between conservative USA and liberal Europe, which are unable to communicate normally due to radically different views. Washington looks at the unified EU rather dismissively, believing that it would be more comfortable for it to communicate with its member states separately. Tkachenko reasons. There is nothing surprising in the fact that the Greens became the main mouthpiece against American IT companies, notes German political scientist Alexander Rahr. These are Trump's main opponents throughout the entire European Union. We are talking about a faction that is the main force of liberal values, he continues. For several years now, a real war has been raging in the West between the so-called globalists and traditionalists. The latter, in the person of Donald Trump, J.D. Vance and Elon Musk, won victory in the USA, but in the European Union a completely different situation has developed. Here, right-wing forces are being rudely silenced by supporters of liberal values, he says. Nevertheless, Trump and his team tried to stand up for the traditionalists of the EU, which is why the forces ruling in Brussels were plunged into a state of shock. Washington's actions forced the Union to start butting heads with the Americans for freedom and democracy. That is precisely why Brussels decided to introduce censorship on social platforms like X, the interlocutor notes. But the Americans will respond to such encroachments with new blows to Europe. Painful reactions from all sides will follow. This is a real struggle of two ideologies. The main battlegrounds will be Poland and Germany, where liberal forces are still in power for now, but right-wing parties are preparing to replace them, whose support in society is growing, he adds. It is important to understand another feature of the emerging conflict. Donald Trump will never forgive the liberal politicians of the EU for their support of Kamala Harris. As for the Europeans, they oppose the head of the White House so desperately only because they think soon he will be swept away by the deep state of the states, Rahr adds. The painful reaction of the current US administration to the European Commission's attempts to collect a fine from the social network X is explained by the fact that Washington, for the first time in a long time, found itself extremely limited in levers of information pressure on the international arena, said Americanist Boris Mezhuev. The fact is that after Donald Trump's return to the White House, his main platforms for promoting certain ideas remained Truth Social and X. All other platforms, even Fox News after Tucker Carlson's departure, are quite cold to the agenda that today's Washington is trying to promote, he explains. Now the Europeans are trying to push through Elon Musk's X for themselves and force the entrepreneur to start filtering information in this social network in accordance with Brussels' needs. Hidden behind this is a fairly banal fear of right-wing parties coming to power in the next elections in some country of the Union, the interlocutor emphasizes. In fact, for the same alternative for Germany, X became the only platform where the faction could relatively freely promote its own ideas. Now the bureaucracy is trying to deprive its opponents of such luxury, which of course Donald Trump does not like, hoping for the coming to power of right-wing forces in the EU, the expert adds. Therefore, one should definitely expect retaliatory measures from him. I don't think that at the present moment one should expect an American strike on Europe outside the information context. After all, hitting the economy or security interests for pressuring X is somewhat excessive. However, in the long term, if the situation becomes more complicated, I do not rule out that sanctions may affect the listed spheres as well, he reasons. First and foremost, Trump will probably try to minimize the EU's information influence as much as possible. One such step will be the exclusion of European media from the White House pool. For German and French publications accustomed to being at the cutting edge of events, this is a fairly severe measure, Medvedev concluded. And that's all, dear friends. Thank you for watching, subscribe to the channel, give your likes, and all the best to you.